For today's class, you should have read two articles, Martin 1993 and Wright 2008. Both of these focus on the topic of writing in science classroom contexts. This session, Reading and Writing Science, is the first session of Module 2 on Academic Language in Science, a collaboration between the University of the District of Columbia and the Center for Applied Linguistics as part of the Project First grant. The session will start with a warm-up. Then we'll examine background data on reading and writing achievement nationally and do a review of the two articles that you read for today's class. You'll get a chance to apply some of your new understandings by doing a data workshop. The session will end with a wrap-up and assignment. The objectives for today are to discuss reading and writing abilities of linguistically and culturally diverse students, to review and discuss information about reading and writing practices in science learning contexts, to examine specific uses of written language in science learning contexts, and to think critically about scientific language practices related to reading and writing and implications for pedagogy and student learning. Pair up with a partner. The instructor will assign you a scientific figure. Discuss what you see, and then write a short paragraph describing the figure together. Now, join another pair. Show them your figure and read your description to them. Are your figures similar or different in topic or format? Based on what you learned in Module 1, think about the type of language that was used to describe each figure. What do you notice? What do you notice about the three levels of academic language: discourse, sentence, and word levels? What made this task easy or difficult? Now let's get into some of the background about reading and writing. In this section, you'll learn more about the state of reading and writing nationally. Each year, a subset of American students take the National Assessment for Educational Progress, or NAEP. This test is often called the nation's report card because it's one of the only tests used across different states to see how students are doing at a national level. In the next two slides, you'll see some results from this assessment. Consider the outcomes for different groups of students: the so-called mainstream students, who are white, non-minority, and English-speaking, African American students, and English learner students. Out of 500 possible points, what do you predict is the average achievement of these groups? Are there any potential differences? Why or why not? Take a look at the results for white, non-English learners for public school reading outcomes from NAEP in 2015 for 4th, 8th, and 12th grade. What trends do you notice? Keep in mind that the maximum score is 500. Now turn to a partner and make a prediction for the scores for African American and English learner students. Once the outcomes have been revealed, discuss why you think there are different outcomes. What are the factors that might be involved? These are the 2015 scores for the NAEP Writing Assessment for public school students in grades 4, 8, and 12. Note the average score for white non-English learner students out of 300. What trends do you notice? Now turn to a partner and make a prediction for the scores for African American students and English learner students. Once the instructor has revealed the answers, discuss why you think there are different outcomes. What are the factors involved? The District of Columbia content standards align to the Common Core state standards, which explicitly target language and literacy skills. The Common Core emphasizes reading across all of the content areas. There are reading standards for literature, informational text, and foundational skills, which may be thought of as beginning reading skills on phonemic awareness and phonics. These foundational skills in reading are intended only for students in K-5. However, secondary students who are English learners, particularly newcomers arriving with low levels of formal education or literacy in their first language, may need explicit attention and practice with skills such as word recognition and fluency. For grades 6 through 12, there are also literacy standards for history and social studies, as well for science and technical subjects. With regard to writing, the Common Core emphasizes 3 text types: narrative, informational text or explanations, and arguments. Take a piece of scrap paper or work in your notebook to write a quick note. What are the skills involved in reading comprehension? What are the different levels of reading comprehension? And how does writing differ in the types of text? This slide gives you an overview of two foundational national panels devoted to literacy. In 2000, the National Reading Panel convened and identified the core elements of literacy for English-speaking students to include phonemic awareness, or the ability to identify and manipulate sounds, phonics, letter-sound correspondence, fluency, vocabulary, and comprehension strategies. This study included all students and did not disaggregate English learners. In 2006, the National Literacy Panel by Diane August and Timothy Shanahan focused on English learners specifically and concluded that English learners' literacy needs are compatible with the above components. However, English learners need a strong emphasis on oral language and vocabulary development. Furthermore, they promoted comprehension as the most central component of literacy instruction for English learners. Other considerations for the instruction of reading for English learners includes the fact that some students may arrive with strong literacy skills in their first language, and these skills, such as decoding symbols, using a glossary, and inferring, will translate to their second language. However, as a reminder, early on, these first language skills will not be reflected on reading assessments in English. On the other side, some students arrive with limited formal schooling and may not have literacy skills in their first language. Oral language skills in the first language can be used to develop second language vocabulary, as well as background knowledge. In terms of writing, some challenges for linguistically and culturally diverse students include the fact that the diversity of their experiences might not match the grade-level science curriculum that U.S. students have been exposed to. If they've experienced informal education or even attended schools with limited resources, these students may not have been exposed to some of the writing genres of science, such as technical writing or lab reports. Lastly, students may have had limited exposure to academic vocabulary and language structures related to science writing. Now let's review the articles you read as homework to see if we can identify other helpful information for you in preparing your diverse students to succeed in reading and writing in science classrooms. The first article you read was Martin 1993. To review this article, turn to handout 1A, Martin Expository Text Frames with a partner or small group. Use Martin 1993 to complete the following expository text frame to describe the major genres and text types that Martin reviews. You can fill in the blanks with one or more words to summarize the chapter. Using what you know from the article, complete the text frame to summarize the article. You can look back at the article if you need to. Your answers should look something like this. Science textbooks are often a primary model for how students are supposed to write in science. Martin 1993 analyzes several common genres or text types. For example, reports help organize information. This type includes classifying, decomposing, describing functions, and listing properties. Explanations are long reports composed of small reports. Another important text type is an experiment which exemplifies facts. Two other less common text types are biographies and expositions. The least common type of text is narrative because of its imaginative use of language, such as science fiction. This chart shows a list of the various genres of science writing for Martin, as well as the function and type of writing. There are reports that organize information, that classify, decompose, describe functions, and list properties. Explanations are large reports made up of a series of smaller reports. Experiments exemplify facts, and they include procedural and recounts. Biographies review history of science. Exposition presents arguments, and narrative is an imaginative type of writing. The expository text frame and the chart are two types of writing that may be useful for students in different ways. Discuss how these two types of texts are different and how each one may be useful in different ways. Now let's take a look at a quote in the Martin article from Britain. Surely it is the links between common sense and theoretical concepts, the links between ordinary language and theoretical language that make learning possible, whether in school or out, and it is the ability to move back and forth across that continuum that characterize thinking at any mature stage. How does this quote relate to what we're learning about reading and writing in science contexts? Martin writes, "Common sense knowledge can be a very useful starting point for learning science, since it organizes the world in ways that can be clearly related to scientific understandings. At the same time, it's clear that common sense understandings differ from scientific ones, and that schools have a crucial responsibility to induct students into the alternative scientific worldview. Teachers need to be constantly aware of the dangers of stranding students in their own words. Teachers have a very important guiding role, bridging across common sense and science. Students' own words are a very important part of learning science, but teachers can teach students new ways with words, ways that reflect valued ways of expressing understanding." Now let's turn to the other article you read for today. With a small group or partner, answer the following questions in your notebook. First, describe Wright's article. Where did the study take place? Who were the participants in the article? What did she study and how did she study it? Second, what were the roles of the teacher, the text, and the peers in the student's writing? And third, what types of writing were important in this particular curriculum? The study that you read about was a video ethnography that took place in a suburb of Washington, D.C. The researcher video recorded and transcribed the verbal and nonverbal interactions of 8th grade students in a chemistry classroom. She looked at how written texts were created over the course of the enactment of the chemistry unit. In tracing the text through the interactions, she found that the teacher, text, and peers all played a role in students' writing. Oftentimes, written texts are seen as individual efforts, as one student creating a piece of writing alone. By tracing text through interaction, it was clear to see how others contributed in subtle and not so subtle ways in the production of the texts. What may be judged as an individual effort is actually a collaborative process of text production. Some of the prominent types of writing in this classroom were charts or tables. These were used to record observations, make predictions, and balance equations. Written responses were typically shorter, sometimes only 1 or 2 words were used. Students didn't have to write in complete sentences. Think and write questions were used to relate science to real-life contexts. For this type of writing, students were expected to write in complete sentences or even paragraphs. Now take a moment to reflect on Martin's chapter and Wright's article. What were the main points that you'll remember about these pieces? And what implications do you see for your own use of scientific reading and writing? It's important to remember that there are different types of writing in science classroom contexts with different communicative expectations. Drawing students' attention to the genre of writing is a useful metalinguistic skill. It helps students understand how written language may be used to make meaning in science contexts, and how those different ways of using language may have different rules and educational expectations. Developing metalinguistic awareness in students may help them be able to express their conceptual understanding. It's important to remember that there are different types of writing in science classroom contexts with different communicative expectations. Drawing students' attention to the genre of writing is a useful metalinguistic skill. It helps students understand how written language may be used to make meaning in science contexts, and how those different ways of using language may have different rules and educational expectations. Developing metalinguistic awareness in students may help them be able to express their conceptual understanding in ways that are recognized and valued. It's also important to remember that texts do not come out of thin air. Students can be provided resources, such as teacher talk, other texts, and peer work, to produce authentic texts. All of these resources can help support students' development of writing skills. Strategically considering the genre and resources will help students succeed in developing writing skills in science classrooms. Now it's time to apply what has been discussed today in a data workshop. Please form a group. The instructor will provide a science text about different types of weathering that you're going to read with your group. Please look over the text and answer the following questions. What kind of text is this? What kind of genre is it? What aspects of scientific language do you notice in the text? Underline discourse structures, sentence features, and important words and phrases. What would make this text challenging for students to read? And what do you think you could do to make it more accessible? Take a look at handout 1B, Expository Paragraph Frames. Expository text frames are one way to help make texts accessible to students. We'll be practicing with this method today. Expository paragraph frames provide a structure for retelling information presented in expository text. They're based on the principle that information in exposition is structured in a way that is logical and serves to make the information clear to the reader. In effect, the organizational structure, the composition of the text, provides the structure for its comprehension. If this is to be true, however, the student needs to be familiar with the various structures that authors use and have practice in using those same structures. The purpose of expository paragraph frames is to teach students the structures of the text that they can expect to encounter in what they have to read. Now let's take a look at 5 common ways to organize expository texts. First, there are descriptions. In a description, a topic is introduced and followed by its attributes or details. In a sequence, a topic is introduced and followed by details that need to be presented in a specific order. In a cause and effect, an event or act and its effects are described. In a comparison-contrast, similarities and differences in 2 or more things are presented. And finally, in a problem solution, a problem is presented, followed by 1 or more solutions. Take a look at the example text about cells. Read the example text with your partner and look at the sample expository text frame. How do you think the frame helps support students' comprehension of the text? Now it's your turn to create an expository text frame. Look back at the weathering text and your notes about it. Determine how the text is organized. Is it a description, a sequence, cause and effect, comparison-contrast, or problem-solution? Then, use the examples of expository text frames that we've looked at today to craft your own. Now it's time to wrap up. Think about how we use language in the class today. How did we use the 4 domains of language: listening, reading, writing, and speaking? What language did you need to know in order to engage in learning? For your next session, read the text assigned here. As you tick it out, think about questions you may have about how to meet your students' needs for reading and writing in science class. What would you like to know more about after this introduction?